Hi, I'm Travis Yates with the Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society. Our mission here at the Society is to secure a new home for the U.S. Army Signal Museum, preserving the legacy of all the men and women who have served at Fort Gordon. And we're pleased today to have joining us with this fireside chat Anna Smith, Sergeant First Class retired, and currently the marketing manager for the Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society. Anna, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you do so much for the Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society. Before we talk about your journey, tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now for the society.
So currently, right now, for the Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society, I'm the secretary as well as the marketing manager. So what I do is I try to reach out to organizations for support, read through grants, do research on grants, and just try to gather information to get our funds more available for us and donations and things like that to try and get us a home because it's important for us to preserve our history.
So, how did you initially find the Signal Corps? We go way back in your career.
So actually, my uncle was a Signal Corps officer, and I had moved in with him for high school. And at that point, I knew that I wanted to join the Army, and once I took my ASVAB and I got all my results back, Signal Corps was 25 uniform was one of the jobs. And I said, I think I would have a lot of fun with that. So I went that route and kind of keep it in the family as well. And I was reserves first. And then I decided to switch to active duty, and the love of it started there. And my birthday is actually June 21st, which is the day the Signal Corps was created. So it fits.
A little bit of karma. Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the day you enlisted and you say you started with the reserves. What was kind of going through your mind when you made that decision and, signed on the dotted line, so to speak?
Initially, I was looking for the route of paying for college and going through ROTC, becoming an officer. And I was in AIT here at Fort Gordon, which is Advanced Individual Training. So it's your second phase going into becoming a soldier. And I went home on Christmas block leave and had a conversation with my family saying, I think I want to do this full time. So my aunt and uncle talked with my recruiter while I went back to training, and I finished training at the end of January of 2008. And I went home, and then I reported to my first duty station, active duty, in April of 2008, which was Fort Benning. So it all worked out, and I was able to go active duty and start my journey there. I just had to do school. That was one promise that I had to make to them, and I have.
How about basic training? What was that experience like for you?
Basic training was fun for me. I really enjoyed it. I was very athletic, so being able to do like running and just exercises, things like that. I mean, just the knowledge base. I kind of had a little bit of it, so it was nice to get in there, and I could help mentor people who didn't have a military background as well. It was a lot of team building, which is something that I love doing. And I grew a lot as a person, and I learned a lot. Built confidence in myself, and I kind of learned some leadership attributes that I pulled out of me that I didn't know that I already had. So it was really fun for me, and I always considered it a great experience. Don't get me wrong, it was very hard. And there were some days where I didn't want to continue, but it was a lot of fun looking back now.
And you mentioned that it was a family affair. How about your friends? Were they surprised when you told them about your plans?
Not really. Not really. My best friend kind of was when I told her that I went from reserve to active, but I mean, they kind of already knew I was ready to go see the world and conquer it. So they weren't really surprised when I actually did it.
Any funny stories from basic training that you can share with us?
I do. So it was towards the end, and I had my wall locker, and I was facing it. I was cleaning it up, and I had just left it open. I went right around the corner to where my battle buddy was, literally not even 2 feet away. And when I turned back around about 30 seconds later, my drill sergeant was pulling everything out of my wall locker because I left it open and unsecure. And even though I was 2 feet away, it was still open and unsecure. So I ended up having corrective training in right outside their office for about 3 hours, various exercises. And it's funny now. At the time, it was terrible. I had like a pool of sweat. But she leaned down, and one of them was a female. She leaned down. She's like, "You know why I'm making you do this?" And I said, "Roger, I left my, stuff in security drill sergeant." She goes, "No." And she's like, "I see something in you." She's like, "I'm teaching you a lesson right now." And I was like, "Okay." She's like, "You got to remain tough." She's like, "Just because you make a mistake, you do the punishment, and then you move on." She's like, "You're going to be a great leader." I was like, "Okay, thanks." And now, mind you, I'm still in the front leading rest position, which is like the push-up position, while she's like telling me this. So it's dripping sweat, and yeah. But yeah, I'll never forget that. And it was funny and motivational at the same time. Looking back, I'm like, well, I probably should have closed it, but there was others. I mean, we all had a good time, and, coming in and all hours of the night, and them making loud noises and throwing things across, and, bunk beds moved in all sorts of directions, trying to find your things, just good times.
Mm-hmm. How about during your service? Did you serve in any wars or conflicts?
I have. So I got to Fort Benning in April of 2008, and I was 18. I had turned 19 in June, and I was in Iraq in August of 2008. So I had very little time to prepare to go to Iraq. And we went to Ras Amaya, which was on the southeast corner of Baghdad. We were there for about 3.5 months before we closed that down and moved down south to the Al-Amara province. And that's closer to the Iran border, like right on the Iran border. We were attached with an Iraqi army compound. And we were there for 8 months. We lived in a GP medium, which is not very big. And it was myself, another female, and 10 males that lived in the tent. And we built up little walls to kind of give us some privacy, each of us. And I had a Connex to work out of. I had a little red wagon that I would put my radios in, and I would have to drag that thing all the way around. I had about 60 vehicles that I took care of for communications. And before electronic warfare became a job, an MOS, we had a class, and it was about a week-long class that they did there, and we were the electronic warfare officers. So I actually got the class before it was even an MOS, and I had to do that as well. So I had to check all their counter IED systems in the vehicles before they went out, make sure that they were working properly. And I was a PFC at the time, private first class, and I quickly became in charge because I had 2 other platoons that were outside at other bases, and my NCO got sick and he got sent home. So I ended up kind of having to take over, and I started managing everything because I was with headquarters. So I had to do all the briefings and stuff. And, again, thrown into the fire and I grew a lot, but my experience overall was good. I look back, and don't get me wrong, I was terrified. And there were moments that, were very scary, but experience wise and things like that, I think it was great. It was a great opportunity for me to be so young, start with that, get the leadership opportunity. And then, I made it home safely. So that was good. And I also went to Afghanistan.
You mentioned.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I went to Afghanistan in November of 2011. I actually came back at the end of January of 2012 because I was accepted into the White House Communications Agency. So I spent very little time there. And we were at Bagram Air Base, so it was a lot different. It was more of a different experience than Iraq was. We still had rocket attacks and things like that happened, but it was just such a it was different because it was such a large base, and lived in like a little building with sectioned off areas. So my area was a lot bigger, had a little bit more privacy. And I did more IT side instead of tactical side, which is what I did in Iraq. So it was a different experience. It was short lived, which is okay because I got to go on to bigger and better things. So
You mentioned, hauling around the radio and the radios in the red wagon during your first tour.
yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, the equipment that you used, how it might have evolved from your first, tour to your next.
So because they were different missions, it was definitely different. But I can say, so as a 25 uniform, we're radio operator maintainers. So what we do is we take the lower tier communication and we work on that. And we make sure that it's up in the vehicles and the soldiers can communicate as they go out onto missions, whether it's foot patrols, in the vehicles, any type of communications. So the radios that I had were original RT-1523 Alpha Bravos, and I even had a Charlie and the Echoes and Foxtrots. So the Echoes and Foxtrots are what we still use today. They're smaller. They're typically known as the ASIP radio. And that's something that I had, but I didn't have a lot of them. So I prioritized them as much as I could, but I still had to maintain the Alphas and Bravos in order to have backup, because when we lost vehicles, if that equipment was unable to be recovered, then I had to replace it with something. Because I didn't have a lot of the ASIP radios, I had to use older generations of things, which operated very similar but a little bit different. Their hub batteries were in different places. They were a lot larger. They were heavier, and I had to, in order to get many of them into the vehicles or swap them out and get maintenance done, I had to transport them somehow, and I had a wagon to do it. So, because a lot of the trucks were used for other things, whether it was getting supplies or out on mission. So I had my little red wagon that I put all my radios in, and I took it to the computer and electronics station that we had, which was the people that actually repair the radios go inside and actually do things. I was able to do very minor repairs, but if it was something inside, I had to take it to them. So yeah, there was other maintenance and things that I couldn't do. So I had to take my little red wagon with all my radios. And I had my weapon slung. I had an M16 that hit the back of my calf the whole time because it was so long. And it was fresh gravel because it was a brand new base. So it was an adventure, and it was very, very hot. Peaked at about 140 degrees. So it, you got used to that heat, but it was terrible. Didn't make it easy, but yeah. So that was my experience, my little red wagon.
How about communicating with people back home? How did you stay in touch with friends and family here in the States?
So because it was, the internet was really starting to grow, Skype had just really become a thing. I was able to do that with my family here and there when we had the ability to, but typically we just used our network, and we had a satellite phone that we had to use. We rotated times. You had time slots about once a week or so, depending on what was going on, and depending on if we were black on comms or not, which means something happened, so we had to shut everything down. But realistically, I think about once a week or so, and that's kind of what I try to do. Or letters. I got a lot of letters and wrote letters and things like that. So a little bit more of a older style of communication, because internet wasn't something that was always working. So when it was, we tried to take advantage of talking to family and using Skype. And there was ability to get cell phones, and you had to get a SIM card and put money on it. So so that's another way that we could do it as well. It's just a little bit harder and a little bit more expensive. So they did have call centers, but not where we were. We didn't have the call thing yet. They were working on it. So satellite phone was majority of how I talk to my family. And you call one person so they can call everybody. So, yeah.
Is there anyone in particular, or maybe in a group that that you served with that you really remember fondly?
I do. So I have, there weren't many females with me on that fob. There was about 1,200 of us there, and out of that 1,200, there was maybe 30 females. So we kind of came together very quickly, and especially in my company. There was a few of us that hung out all the time, and then others, we had a volleyball court that we had made. So we played volleyball and yeah, I mean, there's always fond memories. I took a lot of pictures, and I took a lot of pictures for the company. So I have thousands of photos from it that I actually have on our Facebook page from who I was deployed with, and just caught a lot of good memories and from it. Cool things that we did and fun stuff that we did. So it was good.
Yeah, I was going to ask, any funny stories that you can share? Is there any time for pranks or anything like that, or is it all business when you're over
No,
there?
of course you have pranks. I worked a lot, so there was quite a few times where I worked about 18 to 20-hour days. So you have to have fun. I mean, when you can, you have to joke. You have to, just have a good time with what you got. We really didn't have a lot of things that were like to do pranks, so we had to kind of get creative, like scaring, but it was really weird about scaring people because you have a weapon all the time. So it's kind of like you got to be careful about where you do that. If you're going to the bathroom, we had porta potties, so that was like the only way that you could go to the bathroom, unless those were overflowed because the people who cleaned them went on strike, so we had to find alternatives. But yeah, I mean, you kind of joked around a little bit. You had to have a sense of humor, had to have thick skin, poked fun at each other about things, or if you were looking kind of scraggly and stuff because you haven't showered in 2 days because you're working so hard and the only thing you want to do is just lay down and go to sleep. You're like, you look a little rough, like you're doing okay. Things just, we did try to have, like, when we did get some meats and stuff in, we did some barbecues and stuff, and just tried to have general fun. And you're in the suck together, so you just embrace it. But,
So you are retired now. What was that process like, and how was the transition to civilian life?
so for me, it's a little bit different because I'm medically retired after 15 years. So I went through, it was a lot more, the timeline was unpredictable. So when it happened, it was quickly to go on leave, to out process and things like that. So it was very, very quick. And for me, I'm a planner, and I planned as much as I could before I got to that point where, hey, everything's back. Here's your orders. Now you can start moving on with your life. Transition wise, it was very difficult. It was hard for me because I love the Army. I love being a non-commissioned officer, a senior non-commissioned officer nonetheless. And I was up for review for promotion this year. So my first look, and I was curious to see where I was at, and I wanted to rank up, and I had 5 years left. So I wanted to stay in, but I knew that for my health, it was more beneficial for me to go ahead and go further with the medical evaluation board process. And I had a lot of support from my leadership. I had a lot of support from people. They were sad, but they understood and helped me through the whole thing. So it was really great to have that leadership support, the friends, the family, everybody. But when you've been doing it for so long, it's hard to just let go of. It's not like leaving a job, you're leaving a lifestyle. And that's something that I'm still kind of struggling with, is leaving the lifestyle and the lingo, the personality, the conversations. It's just a little bit different. I kind of mentioned thick skin earlier, and that's something that I grew up with in the Army. So I have a little bit of a sense of humor and thick skin. So joking a little harshly is not that big of a deal for me. Whereas somebody else, they take offense to it, and I'm not used to that. So it's something that I'm learning. And something that I'm excited about as well, like learning a whole new environment, a whole new lifestyle, and letting go of some of that stuff, because you don't realize how much stress it causes you. But it's worth it. It really is. When you're a non-commissioned officer or an officer, depending on what you do, your impact on soldiers and who you lead is extremely important. I have my first soldier is actually just made Sergeant First Class. So he caught up to me. So to see that and to be able to see that and, you know, have them reach out to me and say, hey, you know, thanks for your leadership. Thanks for being hard on me when I didn't know I needed it, and things like that. That's what I'm going to miss the most, is how you impact people's lives, how you can help mold them and support them and watch them grow. They're kind of like children. is how I've always looked at it. So that's something that the transition that I'm going to miss the most.
You mentioned the lingo. Is there a phrase or word that will just never be the same now that you've served?
I don't know. I think it's just how we have a lot of acronyms. So some of the acronyms don't transition the same when it comes to civilian, and especially in the IT world, they're virtually the same. But when you actually talk about it, the other day I was talking to my new company. I was like, yeah, do you have that on digits? And they were like, you mean like on the computer? I was like, yeah, yes, I do. They're like, oh yeah, I have that. And I was like, oh, I guess that's like, is that something that we say a lot and it's just doesn't translate? And I guess it threw me off, because I was like, you don't know what that is. So we say that a lot in the Army. We say, hey, can you send it to me on digits instead of printing it off and having it? So that's something that I think is going to be, just that one example is one that I have right now. I'm sure in the next couple months I'll have a lot longer list.
So you shared a lot of the things that you'll miss. How about something that you are glad to leave behind? Anything that you won't miss at all?
So the leadership aspect of it is a double-edged sword. I will miss being a leader, but at the same time too, being independently responsible with myself, and not having to know every single detail about those that I work with. Making sure that they eat before they came in, making sure that the general care is going to be there, but if they get in trouble and get a DUI, I'm not being pulled in the office going, hey, why did your soldier get a DUI at 2 a.m. while you were sleeping at home? Well, because I was sleeping at home, being responsible. So it's things like that I'm not going to miss, is that that type of environment of the mass punishment piece of it. But other than that, that's probably like the biggest thing, is the mass punishment that I'm not going to miss.
And then how about looking forward, Anna? What would you like people to know about, the work being done by the Fort Gordon Historical Museum Society? Why is this such an important cause?
So for me, it's the generation to keep the history alive. They say that if we don't remember what happens in history and things like that, we tend to forget it and it tends to repeat itself. We have a lot of great things that have happened in the Signal Corps, and a lot of great things that have come from the Signal Corps, different jobs, different things, a different branch, the Air Force. So passing that knowledge around, keeping that knowledge alive, keeping our legacy alive. I mean, now that I'm done with my career, I have a legacy. I still have soldiers that I've trained. I have soldiers that I've taught as an instructor that are there, and I want them to see the history of how far we've come within the Signal Corps, as well as what we've, the things that have developed outside of us. That's to me important, is remembering your roots. My grandfather, he was actually also in the Army. He's a retired colonel. And he always said, never forget where you came from. And that's something that always stuck with me. And he meant it in multiple different ways. He meant it in kind of like, never forget where you come from. Never forget where you came from when you were a private as you gain rank. And also just never forget like what it took to get here. So the things like the technology, I talked about the radios, how they changed. I had old that were used in Vietnam. I had things, and now to what we use, and how I have a cell phone, that I have a mini computer. That wasn't developed yet, or just becoming developed at that time when I first went to war. So how far we've developed in that, I want them to see that and kind of see where, like, now they're the next generation to take the technology further, and they can be able to see their impact on it as well.
Anna, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your service to your country and all that you're doing today with the museum.
Thank you.
To view other Fireside Chats and for more on how you can help save our story, you can visit GordonHistoricalMuseum.org.